headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Morning, Julia.
First of all, just your thoughts on, before we get into, how we tackle people who are continuing to impose these rules on people, your reaction to the fact that we are in a situation where, while other countries across Europe are having, vaccine passports, even just to sort of, go into a supermarket, go into a cafe, that it's horrific they were brought in here, but that they have been axed, and that the mask mandate has been ended, even though there's guidance for people to continue in some crowded areas. Are you relieved by this? Are you surprised? Are you welcoming? Or are you still worried that this is just a temporary measure and who knows, this could be brought back at any time?
Well, there's always that concern, but I think the trend has been in the right direction since the beginning of the year, at least. It did seem as though there was a very concerted effort by SAGE and by certain people in the government to push the government into much greater regulations before Christmas and then just after Christmas and before the new year, and that was resisted. So I think credit where credit is due. That credit seems to go to the Prime Minister, if anyone, I would have thought, given that was resisted. And
standing firm against the doom mongers.
Perhaps. And in addition to that, we've seen much less of the fear narrative and a much more realistic approach to what is very obviously a much less serious strain of the virus, which is entirely to be expected when people have much more immunity, both vaccinated and natural immunity, and of course, because viruses generally turn into less severe strains. So that's encouraging, and I suppose we've been expecting it for a couple of weeks now.
But it is finally here. I mean, it's still amazing how many of the media outlets are still saying, is it too soon to end Plan B? And how successful Plan B was in tackling the COVID, this outbreak of Omicron. But of course, there's simply no evidence whatsoever that vaccine passports and masks have played any role in that. Work from home, yes, people working from home and not having contact with people. When they stop working from home, they'll have contact with people. They will no doubt get Omicron, as many who are out and about have done. But again, you say a much milder version. But it's fascinating that people are still claiming that Plan B is somehow responsible when a lot of Plan B measures and much more are in place. Wales, Scotland, been in place across much of Europe, and they've seen sky-high cases across most of Europe, even with these tougher measures, we're told, which apparently work against this virus. I mean, it is extraordinary how many people who say follow the science, when the science doesn't agree, the facts don't actually add up, they're somehow quite happy to ignore it.
And a good illustration of that is France. We have still more testing than France. We shouldn't, but we do. And despite that, we have at our peak of Omicron cases, i.e. infections, not even infections in some cases, asymptomatic traces of the virus, we had half as many, and that's been going down for some time. Yeah. We have far fewer people in intensive care, and that was going down. So even if the metric is measured differently, it's been going down for some time. It's going up in France. So all the evidence suggests that they have absolutely no effect. And in fact, a broader point could be made looking back on the evidence about lockdowns and their effectiveness. The reality is, again, with lockdowns, we saw a classic Gompertz curve going up and then going down. Same in Stockholm and London, first lockdown. These are important lessons because they were some time ago. But as you said, the threat is that this could always come back.
Yeah.
We look in retrospect at the evidence and we compare it not to what the modelers said would happen or said might happen in the future, but what's actually happened elsewhere in the world where they did and didn't have these sort of excessive and extreme reactions, unprecedented reactions. We see very little evidence that they were effective, and massive evidence, of course, and huge harms, irrespective of what.
And a lot of people only waking up to those harms. People seem to be really surprised by all these children who are uneducated and all these millions of people who've missed out on healthcare and the mental health crisis, particularly among young people in this country, which is, horrific and heartbreaking, and elderly people left to die alone with dementia. I mean, people the economic cost. Writing off billions in loans to and furlough schemes and things to companies that didn't even exist. We haven't even touched the sides of the damage that has been done. But here we are today. I mean, I'm thinking brilliant. Life's going back to normal, and we've seen countries like Netherlands and Denmark are saying we're done. Even with sky high cases, no, we're done. We're done with restrictions. This doesn't work. We've got to get back to normal. And yet there are still so many. I mean, we've still got SAGE pushing doom-mongering, bearing in mind they predicted, even just in mid-December, we would have 3,000 deaths a day in January, a minimum of 3,000 deaths a day. We didn't come anywhere close to it. The models have been debunked. No one should be listening to any of their models ever again. I mean, frankly, I think they should all be sacked on the spot. But people are still pushing for people to wear masks. Sadiq Khan, in the Mayor of London, I mean, he wants us to wear masks forever on public transport in London. That's 10 million people affected there. And other train companies as well saying they'd prefer people to carry on. Sainsbury's and Waitrose have both said that they want customers to still wear them. And I know certainly in my local Waitrose, they are forcing their staff, even those who've had exemptions for a long time, to wear their masks against their will. I know because I've been speaking to them about it. What can people do? I mean, I haven't worn a mask in Waitrose since last June. This happens to be my local supermarket. No one's ever questioned me and made an issue of it. But people feel under pressure. People don't want to be seen to be breaking the rules. But if someone says, we'd like you to wear a mask at the door of a supermarket, whether you're a member of staff or whether you're a customer, do they have any right to enforce that?
Well, in principle, a shop does have the right to say you can do what we tell you to do in our shop, but that's subject to two things. Firstly, it's subject to the Equality Act, and there are unknown reasons why people may not be wearing a mask, which may be connected to a disability, for example, and to ask them to reveal that is discriminatory and is in breach of their privacy. And it's in breach of their privacy whether they're disabled or not. So to require that as a blanket policy and not to just accept, I have an exemption, okay, that's fine, you can go in, is indirectly discriminatory at least. And the other point is, and this especially applies to staff, you have to wear these masks all day.
And who, by the way, were working without masks during the first lockdown while everyone else was sitting at home.
And indeed, there was very little difference in the casualty rate of supermarket workers and others, which just shows how ineffective and unnecessary these regulations are to be imposed on the whole community. But there is a responsibility to undertake proper risk assessments. And that doesn't just mean COVID is a terrible thing, it's going to kill people, what can we do about it? That must be masks. And have no reference to evidence whatsoever. They should need to look at the harms of masks. They need to examine the long-term harms, look at the evidence for that. Government's never done that. The shops have never done that have imposed this. And in addition to that, they need to look at the efficacy of masks, and they need to look at the severity of the infection to decide whether or not it's proportionate and necessary to impose these. If they aren't, the shops now have no legal defence for forcing their staff to do it unless they're exempt. They have no legal defence. So they have to do these risk assessments, or else they are in breach of health and safety regulations and health and safety law. And that's an important point because it's been completely ignored by schools and by shops and by the government for the last 2 years. Yeah. It's as though it doesn't exist, health and safety legislation, as though you can just say, there is a virus, it's very serious, masks work, even if they don't, even if the evidence suggests they don't, or it's very weak that they do, and therefore it's proportionate and necessary to put people in masks. And all of the risk assessments that I've seen from schools and other places are completely defective.
Well, even the government, the Department for Education's own evidence, when I asked Nadeem Sahawi, the Education Secretary, to produce that document, they produced it. I mean, it was embarrassingly laughable. Their evidence was that there was no evidence. I mean, it was extraordinary. Really good to talk to you, Francis Hoar, a public law barrister, campaigning on these issues. And, well, you know, if we don't go back to normal now, guys, I've been telling you this, when do we do it?
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.